For Israelis, 1948 was a year of creation. The terrible injustices Jews had faced throughout the world would finally come to an end with the realization of their long sought-after solution, a Jewish state in Palestine. For Palestinians, 1948 was a catastrophe. That one year saw the destruction of hundreds of Palestinian villages and towns, their inhabitants replaced by outsiders from Europe and Russia, and most Palestinians would never see their home again. In the 1800s, Jews across Europe and Russia suffered persecution in many forms. Jews began to look for a way to end their suffering. Some came up with the idea to bring all of the Jewish people out of Europe and settle in a place where they could finally be secure. The place they chose was Palestine, and the movement, formed at the end of the 19th century, became known as Zionism. Europeans had been colonizing land across the globe for centuries, and Zionism would follow in that tradition. But there was a problem that was overlooked by a popular Zionist slogan about Palestine.
A people without land for a land without people. Okay? So they wanted to give the Jews a land because they didn't have land. But the problem is that the land they gave them had people. It was inhabited by Palestinians for thousands of years.
When Zionist settlers began arriving in the 1880s, the Palestinian population already numbered around 450,000 Arabs and 20,000 Jews.
كانوا اليهود موجودين يهود حقيقيين من اليهود اللي غير متطرفين، يعني كانوا مستقيمين وكانوا يعرفوا إنه أنا إلي حق إني أعيش هون مثل ما إله هو حق يعيش هون.
لما أجوا هذول تبعين الغرب هن اللي خربوا الدنيا وهجرونا.
In the early years of the movement, calls for removing Arabs from Palestine were not often made publicly by Zionist leaders. But as larger and larger groups of Jews began arriving in the country, discussions about encouraging the native population to leave by purchasing their land or through other means began to spill into the open.
The leadership of the Zionist movement and the leadership of the Palestinian Arab population. They both have made the same diagnosis of their situation, and this is what they understand, that the establishment of any type of Jewish state in any part of Palestine where there was going to be a Jewish majority necessarily required the large-scale displacement of Palestinian Arabs.
In 1940, Yosef Weitz wrote in his diary, "The only way is to transfer the Arabs from here to neighboring countries. All of them, except perhaps Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Old Jerusalem. Not a single village or a single tribe must be left." In Palestine, even before World War II began, it was clear that war was on the horizon. After crushing the Arab revolt and exiling the leaders of the Arab community, the British decided to take some action to address the concerns of Arabs in Palestine. At the time, there were two Zionist militias in Palestine. The Haganah was far larger and better equipped, but the Irgun was more radical. The Irgun refused to accept the British decision to restrict immigration into the country.
So we started to fight against them.
The King David Hotel was the headquarters of the British government in Palestine. Its bombing in 1946 by the Irgun was by far the largest attack in the Zionist campaign against the British and was a massive shock to Palestine. It left 91 people dead, including Britons, Arabs, and Jews. In the 1940s, the Haganah began preparing for the coming war with the Arabs by creating files on the hundreds of Arab villages and neighborhoods across Palestine.
We used to spy, you might call it, on the Arab villages around to prepare ourselves for the day in which we knew will come. When the British leave, that the fight will not be against the British, but between the Jews and the Arabs. So we used to build up files of pictures and details about the villages so they can be attacked when the point will come. And at the age of 18, even less 17, I was already part of such an operation.
Jerusalem rioters started fires in many parts of the city. Casualties amount to more than a score killed on both sides. But Palestine's most critical period has yet to come. With British troops away from the trouble center, it remains to be seen whether a threatened full-scale war will materialize.
Because the British ran the government of Palestine, neither the Jews nor the Arabs had an official army. However, by 1947, the Haganah, the militia of the mainstream Zionist parties, had become a well-developed force of 35,000 to 40,000 fighters, nearly 4 times more than the poorly equipped Arab militias. The British had announced that they would complete the evacuation of Palestine on the 15th of May. Zionist leaders began preparing for a Jewish state. On March 10th, the Haganah adopted Plan Dalet, also known as Plan D. This plan outlined an overall strategy for the Jewish militia. Its stated goal was to prepare the coming Hebrew state to defend itself once the British army had left. But historians strongly disagree about the intentions of the plan.
The most important part of Plan D was the set of orders that came outside of Plan D. The orders were strikingly clear and unambiguous and used the word letaher in Hebrew, which is to cleanse, or to destroy, which is lehashmid, or to expel, which is legaresh. I think the role of the historian is to fuse these military orders with the plan itself, and then you get an idea of the intention and the implementation.
Under Plan D, the Haganah began organizing large-scale military operations. Just 2 miles from Kastal lay the Arab village of Deir Yassin. Early in the morning of April 9th, fighters from the Irgun set out for the village. Deir Yassin was one of many Arab villages that had signed a peace agreement with a neighboring Jewish village, so they did not expect an attack. The Haganah intelligence officer who reported on Deir Yassin was Mordechai Gichon.
Deir Yassin were only citizens. The village was completely peaceful.
أخوي رحمة الله عليه محمود ضرب سمع الصوت ولا ضرب من هكا منطلق ويعني 12 ساعة متتالية وهم يقاتلوا اليهود.
A number of Arabs died resisting the attack, but a far larger group lost their lives well after the battle had ended. In all, Jewish fighters killed about 110 Arabs at Deir Yassin, most of them women, children, and the elderly.
People were mutilated. Hand grenades were simply thrown in the houses. Women and children were killed, bodies stuffed down wells, jewelry stripped off fingers, fingers cut off, earlobes cut off.
رحت أنا ماشي بعرق الحيط مش من الشارع الرئيسي، من البساتين. الفرن له شباك على ولا اليهود في الفرن، والنسوان قعدات على الأرض وكل واحدة قاعدة وحاطة إيديها على راسها هيك، وبقولوا للفران ارمي ابنك بالفرن، ارمي ابنك بالفرن، اسمه حامد. قال له أنا ما برمي ابني. قال له شوي. هم ضربوا الحاج حامد على راسه ومسكوا الولد رموه بالفرن. أنا شفت هالمنظر، شفت هالمنظر ما تمش فيها حيل من مرة. يعني بعدين مسكوا الأب حطوه وراه، قالوا له الحق ابنك. أنا جيت عديت قلت هلا بيمسكوني، قمت أركض.
After the massacre, they took the people which remained, they took them in a car and went through Jerusalem.
Irgun trucks full of survivors paraded up and down streets in Jewish neighborhoods. Spectators mocked, spit at, and even stoned the villagers.
It was very ugly. After these things, I did not know if I am a Zionist.
After the attack, the Haganah sent men to cover up the atrocities.
They came to me and gave me a platoon of soldiers and told me, go there and make order. And so I came there and I was shuddering because I see how the dead were strewn. And I told them, look here, I'm going to fire and shoot and kill you if you don't clean this up. And so they made graves and buried them, and a few they threw in a well, and everything was apparently clean. And then everything looked peaceful.
But the massacre was not over. Some villagers remained in Deir Yassin, hiding in their homes. For 2 days, Irgun fighters searched for survivors.
مروا مرتين ثلاث ما عرفوش والله ما شافونا لولا الولد صار يبكي أخذوا عزمي صرنا نبكي لأنه ولد أدنى قال هذا بيبي رجعوه كمان شباب صفوهم على الحيط حوالي 15 واحد ورشوهم قدامنا.
Most of the images of the Deir Yassin massacre are in the archives of the Israeli army. The archive refuses to release many of the images and intelligence reports on Deir Yassin, despite being well past the 50-year embargo for classified documents.
Looking back, I'm still, after all those years, very much shocked, and I feel it is a disgrace on the Jewish state and of the Israelis.
The massacre at Deir Yassin was far from the only massacre of the war, but it was the most widely publicized.
By far the most massacres, rapes, atrocities, etc., were committed by Israelis, particularly after 1948 independence, then by Palestinians or by Arabs.
The Jewish offensive continued.
The normal procedure was that the Haganah would begin by a short barrage of either light mortars or 3-inch mortars. Most of these villages were within Titus orchard, so we could come closer by going between the trees of the orchards. As we deployed the width of the front with my platoon, say, in front of the houses, we gave a 1-minute coordinated shot of whatever weapons we had and stormed. And in at least 2 or 3 of these places, when we came into the houses, there was nobody there. There was still coffee on the pot. You could see people lived there until a few minutes ago. They ran into the orchards and hid there and waited to see what happens. And if they tried to come back, they were shot at.
Haifa was the second largest city in Palestine, and its port served as the main exit point for the evacuating British army. So there were a large number of British troops there. On April 19th, the British decided to pull out of downtown Haifa. Just hours after the withdrawal was complete on the 21st, the Haganah went into action. The Jewish attack on Haifa was accompanied by a massive, indiscriminate bombardment by mortars. The Haganah also used loudspeaker trucks to broadcast recordings of shrieks, gunfire, explosions, and calls to flee for your lives. This tactic was used in many places by Jewish militias in 1948.
كانت تمشي دبابة ب4 عجال نشرد الاولاد الصغار يخافوا، الحريم تخاف، العالم تخاف، كله خداع، لانه كانوا بس بدهم يخوفونا، يطلعونا، بدهم يطلعونا.
This British intelligence report describes the attack on Haifa. There was considerable congestion outside the East Gate of hysterical and terrified Arab women and children and old people, on whom the Jews opened up on mercilessly with fire.
And we could see these poor old families, convoys of them, Arabs, cars and vehicles all going up to Lebanon. Very, very sad.
Prior to the war, Haifa had been home to 70,000 Jews and 65,000 Arabs. By May, all but 4,000 of the Arabs had fled the city. The Arab city of Jaffa would be the target of the next Zionist offensive. Jaffa was immediately adjacent to the Jewish city of Tel Aviv and home to the other major port in Palestine. On the 25th of April, the Irgun launched a major offensive on Jaffa. It had been 2 weeks since Irgun fighters had committed the massacre at Deir Yassin. On the first day of the attack on Jaffa, the Irgun commander Amichai Paglin had made his objectives clear: to prevent constant military traffic in the city, to break the spirit of the enemy troops, and to cause chaos among the civilian population in order to create a mass flight. On the third day, he succeeded.
يوم بنتساش يعني قعدنا بالجوع بدنا ناكل، طلعنا تحت القصف، الواحد فاضي ياخذ اكل ولا يهرب بروحه.
The people of Jaffa left half by force, I would say. The Etzer used to bomb Jaffa again and again and again. People ran away. We also told from mouth to ear that if the Jews will enter, it will be a terrible slaughter. So they ran away.
After the Irgun attack, Jaffa's pre-war population of 75,000 Arabs would soon be reduced to just 4,100.
It's not easy when you found yourself in a moment, losing everything. Your family, your home, your business, your school, your past, everything, completely, and thrown out in the street to nowhere.
By mid-May, 250 to 400,000 Arabs had fled their homes. Between a third and half of all refugees who would leave Palestine during the war left before the British completed their evacuation on May 14th. That same day, the Zionist dream became reality as David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Jewish people in Palestine, read the Declaration of Independence.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל. היא מדינת ישראל.
With the declaration of the state, the Jews of Palestine would now be called Israelis. The Arabs of the country would continue to refer to themselves as Palestinians. Massive celebrations broke out in Tel Aviv, but many Israeli fighters had a different reaction.
In the declaration of the state, I was not happy. I did not dance, yes, and I said it will be trouble.
The intervention of the Arab armies did not stop the attacks on Palestinian Arab towns and villages. The next day, Israelis began their final assault on the town of Acre. Palestinians poured into boats to flee the attack.
It was the first time I saw the ugly part of the war. Until then, war was dangerous, but it was not ugly.
في بنت عند خالها أنا ما شفت بس أبوي وأمي شافوا، قالوا اليهود فاتوا افتعلوا فيها وقتلوا خالة. ليش خالة حكى قتلوه؟ ولما صوتها تصرخ وخالها كلهم خافوا من الله ويصيح، أنا صرت أنتق، كل أبوي يابا وطي صوتك يابا لا يجوا كمان، بكفي راحوا جزانك أحسن ما يجوا يابا يفعلوا فيك، وأبوي عمره 70 سنة.
We went and we were moving around the village. The door was open and we entered. Under the table there was a pair of small shoes. They were eating and then somebody told them to go away quickly. He didn't have time to put on the shoes on the baby. This part of the war, I have seen it the first time. This war is not a war of soldiers, it's a war of people, of children. And I started crying. The child needs his shoes. We need to send the shoes to the child. Where can he be?
The United Nations called for a truce. It began on the 11th of June. The truce ended on the 8th of July. The following day, Israel began Operation Danny. This operation targeted Ramla and Lydda, the two Palestinian towns that remained in central Israel and home to the international airport. At the outset of the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Moshe Dayan took a column of vehicles and sped through Lydda, shooting at anything that moved. They left the streets strewn with the bodies of men, women, and children, around 200 in all. The next morning, around 250 more Palestinians lay dead. Israel's Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, went to Operation Danny headquarters. Shortly thereafter, Rabin issued orders for expulsion.
Each family was taken outside their houses on the street, and then we had to walk into sort of gathering areas. We were lucky, they put us in a bus, not a truck. And we were driven to the border, and they started shooting over our heads to make us run.
There were Arabs standing between Lud and Ramle and crying they want to get back to their homes, and I could do nothing. And I felt very strongly about it because I saw them standing there, no shoes, and now they have to start walking and looking for someplace else. Then came the night, and at night, I don't know how many, 15 or 16 or maybe 10, I can't remember, trucks full of people that just came on the ship from the Holocaust. And they took over the town in 5 minutes. And so the whole tragedy was there in one moment. Here are the Arabs who used to live there, and here people who come from the Auschwitz and Majdanek and all that. And they won, they took the city. And the Arabs had to go to Nablus and to Jenin and it's not that it's right or wrong, but it's just a fact.
Prior to the Israeli attack, 50 to 70,000 Palestinians were living in Ramla and Lydda. Now, only hundreds remained. In the north, Israeli units launched Operation Dekel. The main target was the large Christian town of Nazareth. But like most Israeli operations, Dekel also targeted Palestinian villages nearby. Israeli troops captured Nazareth. The next day, the Israeli army issued an order to the commander of Operation Dekel to expel the population.
They usually surrounded the village and left one road open, prevented people from going in any direction except in one direction toward the closest Arab state.
In October, the truce came to an end and fighting resumed. The Israeli army focused on clearing out villages in the two parts of the country where Palestinians remained, the Galilee in the north and the Negev Desert in the south. Hava Keller arrived in the town of Beersheba in the Negev shortly after it was captured by the Israelis on October 21st.
And we came, wonderful, you came just on time. And tomorrow we are throwing out the Arabs from Beersheba. You are going to help. Of course, I'm going to help. The next day I got our gun. We prepared several buses. I think there was 10 or 12 buses. And we called all the Arabs from Beersheba to come to the buses. And I was standing like everybody with a gun, so nobody will try to run away, and all of them will go into the cars and go to Gaza. And they are in Gaza today, until today.
Nobody had an idea that this is a complete expulsion. It's a kind of war which will stop one day and you go back home. Wars happened all over the world. Towns have been occupied. Countries have been occupied. When the war was over, people got back home. Why should we be different?
Then one day we got an order to take the jeeps and spread out and to shoot every Arab whom we saw coming in, coming back. And this is what happened.
The thinking behind this was political but essentially strategic. The Arabs, refugees who had been fighting, they were the Palestinians who'd been fighting against the Jews. And they said if we allow these back, they will overwhelm us as a fifth column, or they will overwhelm us demographically. In other words, there will be hundreds of thousands of additional Arabs, and they will become a majority or close to a majority instantly if they return. So the Israeli cabinet decided not to allow them back.
The human costs of 1948 were high. 6,000 Israelis lost their lives in the war, nearly 1% of the population. Records for Palestinian deaths were not kept, but historians have estimated them to be 2 or 3 times those of Israelis. In 1947, there had been between 500 and 700 Arab villages in the area that eventually became Israel. When the dust of the war settled, all but around 100 had been emptied of their population. 700,000 to 800,000 Palestinians had fled their homes, about 8 out of every 10 Palestinians who lived in the area that became Israel. For decades after the war, the Israeli government claimed that they bore no responsibility for the flight of the Palestinians. Many Israelis still make this claim.
There is consensus on the fact that there was a large-scale displacement of Palestinians. There is also consensus on the fact that this displacement was forced. Some people fled out of fear. Some people fled because there were massacres. Some people fled because rumors were spread about massacres. And some people fled because they didn't just flee, they were actually actively expelled at gunpoint. All of this happened. What remains is the question of whether there was a plan of ethnic cleansing that was designed ahead of time and then systematically implemented during the 1947 and 48 war. And on this question, historians are divided. Either way, the tragedy is clear. Now, what historians do know, and that there is no doubt about, is that the war through which Israel was born was a set of events that, with the same breath, were the destruction of Palestine and the displacement of at least 750,000 Palestinians. That is uncontrovertible.
the United Nations partition plan had allotted 56% of Palestine to the Jewish state. As a result of the war, the State of Israel now covered 78% of the land, all of Palestine, except an area around the west bank of the Jordan River, including East Jerusalem, and a small strip of land around the town of Gaza.
In the beginning, we were very happy about it, but after a short time, I started being not very happy. Where are they? The Palestinians. Are they coming back? Are not they coming back? What will happen now? And the most horrible thing about it was when the war started and the Arabs were thrown out of their villages, not one kibbutz said that they don't want to take their land. Not one kibbutz. Everybody was very happy to steal their land.
Imagine yourself, if you are living in your home, suddenly you find yourself only with a shirt, nothing more. Your past is denied. They say there are no Palestinians. Nobody was living here.
The Zionist movement was successful in establishing the State of Israel. But the dream of a safe haven for the Jewish people has not been realized. Since the end of the 1948 war, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has only grown more complicated and intractable. And the hopes, fears, and grievances that drove the conflict in 1948 are still central to the conflict today. Israelis build more and more settlements in the occupied West Bank, and Palestinians continue to be cut off from their homes and livelihood by military occupation, home demolition, checkpoints, curfews, and the construction of a wall that runs deep into Palestinian territory. As a result, Israel now controls nearly all of historic Palestine.
Here's the question. Was the establishment of the State of Israel so important that no matter what price Palestinians had to pay for it, it was worth it? Or was there something fundamentally wrong with a project that can only be realized by displacing hundreds of thousands of people? If the establishment of the State of Israel was a historic wrong, then the question now arises, how does one redress this wrong?